So we've seen that the numbers have been consistent over the years, and in 2023, there was 120,000 people who moved across the borders of the Western Balkans irregularly, which means that they not crossed through border crossing points, they did not necessarily have their passports or national documents, and they have managed to, at any given time, move through Bosnia, Serbia, North Macedonia, and manage to enter the EU at some point.
Why have the Western Balkans remained a key corridor for irregular migration into the European Union for more than 3 decades? Despite repeated efforts to manage and contain these flows, the route continues to adapt, shaped by conflict, economic pressures, and shifting borders. In this interview, I speak with Donatella Bradic, Senior Program Coordinator for the Western Balkans at the International Organization for Migration. Since joining the organization in 1992, she has followed migration developments in the region through all major turning points, from the disintegration of Yugoslavia to the current period of sustained transit movements. Over the course of this conversation, we discuss the changes in migration practices over time, how the Balkan route operates today, and how IOM's role in the region has evolved. We examine the relationships between international organizations, national governments, and EU agencies in shaping migration policy, as well as the implications of prospective EU accession for the region's future migration governance. This conversation offers a grounded perspective on how migration has been managed in the Western Balkans, with rare insights into European migration policy, regional development, and the practical work of international organizations. So, Mrs. Bradic, thank you very much for being with us and taking part in this interview.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to also reflect on all of the things that you mentioned in your introduction. As you said, rightfully, this region has really undergone a lot of dynamics, changing dynamics, and you said incredible ability to adapt. So I think adaptability of the movements or of the flows and of the responses that have taken place has been quite interesting, I think, to analyze and observe.
Yeah, and now you are joining us from Sarajevo, where you are based today. But let's zoom a little bit out about your own personal journey. How did you encounter the topic of immigration in your career?
I have started working for IOM at the beginning of my professional career in '92 by accident or by luck, I should say. Being, let's say, part of by origin from the Western Balkans, I was born in Croatia. So after the disintegration of Yugoslavia, for me, that was quite an interesting area of work. So being active in the response to the refugee crisis at the time in '92, after the war broke out in Bosnia and Herzegovina, seemed to be the right way for me to start my career. And I was lucky enough to start with IOM.
So it's really the conflicts in Yugoslavia that trigger your interest in refugee issues at the time.
Correct. Also, I am, a part of my background and my heritage is also mixed and have always been affected by borders and by migration. So I think it's part of my personal journey as well to be interested in areas or in issues of migration, equality and equity that that people who migrate are affected. So it's very personal for me as a choice of career.
And so you have been with IOM since 1992. In your view, how have migration practices changed in the Western Balkans over the years, and what were the main turning points? So by migration practices, I mean both the movement of people and the management of these movements.
I think there are two main features that are very distinct in the way that region has responded to migration. So first we have the 90s response, which was mainly affected by the wars and disintegration of the country and violent conflicts on the territory. And the refugees that were kind of looked after or that were taken care of in the countries were mainly of the same origin or similar origin, but definitely with the same language. And so the response was very much about reception, accommodation, providing some sort of solution. In many cases, also durable solutions for these people who never returned to their original country after the conflict was over, which was the case of Serbia and sometimes Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina specifically. In 2015, with the mixed migration movements, I think the situation was completely different because many of the people who were arriving, although the numbers were similar, because there were about 1 million people that arrived in 2015, compared to at some point the same amount moved through Serbia also in the 90s. These were people of different cultural background, different religion, but also different language. So everything was different. The solidarity maybe of the population was still there, but the ability to integrate or the openness of the authorities to integrate or looking at durable solutions for the people on the move was not the same as in the 90s. So they looked at this more as a transit and a temporary experience for them. This became clear with the closure of the route that this is not going to be a temporary feature, that migration will continue, that the movements will continue, and that they'll not be closed. So they had to adapt. They had to adapt to look at some solutions that were rights-based and that also include a range of services for people who were on the move, especially for vulnerable individuals like unaccompanied minors, victims of trafficking, women and families. And so this was a journey that is still on the way, and it's still kind of developing as we speak today.
Yeah, obviously, I perfectly agree with the transition that you mentioned. So we have moved from local flows that were triggered by the war in Yugoslavia of people who were former Yugoslav nationals to a globalization of migration in that particular region of the Western Balkans. Correct. With people coming from various places in Africa and Asia, most probably. And as you say, it's not just that there is a transformation of the profile of the migrants, that then as a result of that also the challenges related to these migration flows evolve and various kinds of abuses also were not so present at the beginning of the story, but now have become very much present. So you have already mentioned the notion. Now let's zoom in on that notion. You talked about the Balkan route. So could you please elaborate a little bit about this notion of the Balkan route? How does it work for people who come from other regions and I believe are mostly interested in moving towards Northern Western Europe? Who are those migrants? How many are there? Who helps them along the way? Why do they take this route? So what is the Balkan route? When did it start?
Okay, so the Balkan route, let's say, existed far before the 2015 movements. So there were refugees and migrants that have moved across the Balkans for many years. The refugees that come from Eastern Europe, for example, sought refuge in Serbia and in former Yugoslavia for many years before the disintegration. Actually, the UNHCR office had its mandated refugees in former Yugoslavia since 2050s, 60s, yeah? So there are people coming from Romania, from Bulgaria, under the, behind the Iron Curtains, who sought refuge in former Yugoslavia.
Sorry, when did the office of the UNHCR start?
In the 60s, 1960s.
In the 1960s, okay.
Yeah. So I think there has been a tradition of this kind of region to host people that sought refuge, but not in such numbers as those kind of showed up at the borders in 2015. So this was triggered, of course, by the Syria conflict and by other conflicts around the world. And at the beginning, with the movements crossing through the Balkans, I think there were a majority of Syrian nationals moving towards the EU and towards Germany specifically. We all remember the pictures of those days when the numbers of people were organized in transiting through and the borders were open. When there was a decision by the European countries and the Western Balkan countries to close formally the route, which means they did not allow for transit to happen freely, people still moved across the route, not necessarily openly, but they found their ways also by really creating a new stream of revenue for organized crime, which is organized smuggling, that has started to really develop and progress in its sophistication and ability to circumvent border controls and security at the borders. So we've seen that the numbers have been consistent over the years, and in 2023, there was 120,000 people who moved across the borders of the Western Balkans irregularly, which means that they not crossed through border crossing points, they did not necessarily have their passports or national documents, and they have managed to, at any given time, move through Bosnia, Serbia, North Macedonia, and manage to enter the EU at some point. The nationalities have also changed a lot. So the Syrian majority in the beginning of 2015-16 had changed to Afghanis, Iraqis, with the changes in the last few years where we have seen North Africans necessarily being like the majority now, or the third nationality on the route, meaning mainly Moroccans. I think what has changed increasingly is two things that made the route change and the nationality change. First is the visa policy regime that was kind of adapted towards the EU kind of visa policy. So a lot of the visa-free regimes in the Western Balkans needed to be overturned and aligned with the EU visa policy. So, for example, there was a non-visa regime between Serbia and Iran, which created a surge of Iranian nationals moving through the Western Balkan routes in 2016. So that needed to be tackled, and Serbia, under EU pressure, changed the visa regime and reintroduced the visa with Iran. The same has happened with Burundi, with India, with Cuba. And so we've seen that slowly the nationalities of these three countries became less visible on the route. So alignment with visa policy is definitely something that has influenced the movements across the region. The second thing is very important and is the no visa regime in Turkey. So as you know, in Turkey, I think they have a non-visa regime with more than 110 countries, which means that a lot of people can come into Turkey, into Istanbul without a visa requirement, and then basically move onwards from Turkey towards the Western Balkan route to reach the EU. And we have seen this really, I would say, over the years, Egyptian nationals, Moroccan nationals, people from different nationalities that actually make it through the route through Turkey, coming by plane to Istanbul, and then finding the connections and finding the contacts that will take them over the border all through the Western Balkans. So I think in the meantime, in this 10-year span since 2015 to 2025, we have seen the evolution of the mechanisms to move people across the route in a very organized manner, circumventing border control and enabling a strong, very strong modality of organized smuggling to take place.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, so you really point at the specificities of the visa regime in the region to explain this route, because it was counterintuitive why would Moroccans transit via the Western Balkans, especially as many Moroccans target rest of Western Europe, especially France or Belgium.
Correct.
And though it has to do with the visa regime of Turkey or even Serbia, but I understand that now Serbia has updated its legislation and only Turkey remains a country with a liberal visa regime.
Yes,
Yeah.
or
And
visa-free
yeah.
arrangements.
And
Yeah.
I understand, yes, given also the importance of Istanbul airport, it's a major hub then for migration to the rest of Europe, and it makes sense that afterwards they transit via the Western Balkans through various ways.
Yeah.
You mentioned the number of 120,000 people who crossed irregularly the borders of this region in 2023. It's always a challenge by definition to give a number for irregular migrants. How did you how were you able to calculate this number?
Yeah. Okay, so there are a number of methodologies that are present, let's say, for collection of data. One is detections on the territory and registration by national authorities, which happens in the territory or in the centers that temporary reception facilities that have been established in the region for reception purposes. So we collect numbers from national authorities. So these are verifiable figures that are given to IOM to kind of, and also Frontex. So you can kind of look at the Frontex figures and compare, and you will see that these are the figures that are predominantly kind of floated by main organizations. So detections by the authorities and biometric registration is happening at a different level, I would say, of prevalence. I would say that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, almost 90% of people who enter and seek some sort of support by the authorities are biometrically registered. So they're fingerprinted and they are put in a database. This ability to register majority of irregular migrants varies in different countries. And I would say the lowest is probably Albania, where the crossing is the fastest. And they are about to, let's say, maybe 40, 50% in Serbia. What does this tell us? It tells us that the smuggling networks are very organized and many people do not necessarily they're not intercepted and they're not detected by the authorities. Hence, they will not be registered. And IOM does a separate survey, which is a qualitative survey. We do interviews with the migrants that we meet and try to ask questions about their journeys and their intentions. And what we learn from these migrants is whether they have been intercepted or whether they have been registered or whether they have sought some sort of support in government facilities. So we can monitor the percentage of people that are outside of government purview, let's say, and those that actually have been assisted by the government. And that gives us a very good indication of what percentage of people is actually registered in a certain country.
Yeah, so you have just so that I follow, you have a survey of people and you
Yes,
can see what is approximately those who have could have been detected and those who couldn't
correct.
have been detected, and then you are able to extrapolate a number. Could you just repeat, please, what was the public of this survey? Who were those people you surveyed?
Yes. So first of all, you can also find this all online. If you look at called the displacement tracking matrix, Western Balkans, you will find most of our publishing materials that have been published. And so you will find very detailed explanations on the methodology and on the approach of data collection and analysis. The people that I mentioned that we surveyed, for example, in 2024, we surveyed more than, let me see whether I can remember that correctly. I think we surveyed more than 13,000 people, for example, in 2024, which means that we have a structured questionnaire that we ask, where we ask them the reasons for leaving, the journey that they've taken, the vulnerabilities that they have, the protection risks that they may have encountered, whether they were subject to violence or abuse on the route, the route that they have taken, how much they have paid for this service by the smugglers, what kind of violence they have encountered on different borders, and also where do they intend to go. So that gives us a quite interesting picture of how people move, how their journey is, what kind of services or needs they have on different portions of their trip, and why and where they want to end up, and how they make their decisions, in terms of movements. So I think we have quite a good insight into these demographics. And I have to say that these are mainly male, like these
Yeah,
are 80% men,
men,
between 17 and 34 years of age.
young men,
They're
alone.
mainly single, moving on their
Yeah.
own or in groups of few, with families at home. But if they are families, they're mainly Syrians, I would say, families, not other nationalities move with families. Yeah,
So mostly young men moving individually.
yeah.
From which are the dominant nationalities except Syria?
Yeah, so Afghanistan, it's
Afghanistan,
the most dominant nationality. And then we have Morocco, Egypt, quite highly features in the last year. I would say that of the unaccompanied minor children that we have encountered in the region, the 50% come from Egypt and
Egypt.
50% come from Afghanistan. So young children moving on their own or in groups are mainly from these two nationalities.
And
Or
most of
we
them
have,
transit via Istanbul airport.
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely.
I see. Okay. Um, okay, it was really fascinating. Um, and last question on the Balkan route. What does this flow? Yeah, the smugglers.
Mhm.
Who are they? Are they local people? Is it a more transnational, international organization? Because you suggest they are very well organized. So
Very
they
well
seem to be
organized.
professional smugglers. So who are they?
So, who are the smugglers? It's a very good, uh, interesting question. We have tried to understand a little bit better the modus operandi of these groups, and we have commissioned kind of an analytical report or an investigative report by an investigative journalism entity here in the Balkans who looked more closely at this point. And we can conclude that they're both nationals and they're both international smugglers. So usually they work in synergy, and the organizers don't necessarily sit in these countries. They sit in their countries of origin or in transit countries where the movements are organized. Let's say
For instance,
for example, in Turkey. The movements, the people who facilitate here, the facilitators are usually locals or foreign nationals who are also kind of infiltrated in the migrant community. So people who are also migrants themselves, who have been recruited on the way here or on the way to Germany or Europe, and have since taken on this role, either to finance their own journey or to earn money on the way to the EU. Often they are taxi drivers, or people who provide accommodation for money or other types of support and service. But these are not the main players. The main players are outside of this region. One important feature is that a lot of the movements are also facilitated digitally. So there is no need to have a physical facilitator. You get your package of information that is delivered to you via, Telegram or WhatsApp, and you receive the GPS coordinates, you receive the contacts of the facilitators all over the phone. So you pay a certain amount, you receive a certain package of information, and that will take you to a certain point of the journey. Then you purchase another package, and that will give you another set of information that will take you over to another geographical parts. But what I'm saying is that they become almost like a travel agency. This is how sophisticated this is. In this package, you will also have like accommodation paid. So migrants don't need to now go into temporary reception facilities. So they avoid getting in touch with authorities throughout the journey. So I think this is very difficult to intercept. It's very difficult to prove in court. The digital evidence that needs to be collected, provided, stored is very tricky for international investigation to take when they take place. So I think that these people are largely working in an environment of total impunity.
I don't know. Listening to you, I imagine a kind of big irregular travel agency in Istanbul that would be dealing. I mean, perhaps.
Absolutely, that's how it looks. You have Istanbul,
Okay.
in Istanbul kind of a city. There are literally shops and booths where you can go and get your kind of package.
I see. I have heard that as well at Victoria
Yeah.
Station in Athens that you can find there.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really, really fascinating. So now let's move to the IOM's role in the region. How are the role of IOM changed during your time with the organization, and what is it doing concretely now?
Yeah. I think the transformation of IOM operations has also been significant in terms of our ability to provide support to governments. You know that IOM has since become a UN organization since 2016. So there are changes that we have done internally to align with the EU principles. So there are a lot of kind of practices and policies that we have put in place to be able to align with with UN standards and principles. So I think that was the major change since maybe the 90s. Also, the ability to maybe provide the more sophisticated technical and policy work to governments has also changed a lot. So I think before it was more a facilitator of immediate response, emergency response, which we still do in many places around the world and have done in the 90s here. But and also have done that during the response to the migration crisis in 2015 and 16, and Bosnia later on when the route changed in 2018. But our primary role is really capacity development on migration governance and on sustainable migration governance. So provide, the political context, the policy framework, the technical capacity, and the ability to operationalize solutions for being able to govern sustainably migration in line with EU principles, because this is an area of EU accession, so this is their primary political kind of direction, but also make sure that we have embedded, international standards in everything that we do.
Mhm. Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit if you would like. So just regarding the evolution, though I have understood the final point, what about the starting point, the role of IOM in the
In the
90s?
90s. I'll tell you my experience from the 90s. I started working with IOM when we were asked by the Jewish Association to ensure the safe resettlement of Sarajevo Jews to Canada. So this was my first job, let's say. In 1992, the Serbian at the time allowed for a convoy of Jewish Sarajevans to leave Sarajevo city, and the Jewish Association, the Jewish municipality in Belgrade, hosted them temporarily, and the Canadian Jewish Association arranged for their resettlement. So IOM was asked in to facilitate the resettlement process, meaning doing the interviews, the paperwork, the medical examinations and clearance, and also the travel arrangements and the cultural orientation. So this is traditional IOM work.
Exactly. Yeah, IOM started as an organization to help people emigrate from Europe in the 1950s.
So this is what we have done also during the 90s in very much in all over the places in former Yugoslavia. So there was a big resettlement program that took place to the US, to Australia, to Canada, and we facilitated that. Slowly, we transformed ourselves into, an organization that looked more at migration governance. So what kind of legislation is in place that governs migration in these countries? We started with establishing the first migration profile of the countries, meaning to map out all the different responses and statistics and data that we have on migration, which included diaspora, immigration, returnees, readmission, all sorts of different processes that take place. And so, asked us, we, for example, helped establish the main migration governance institutions here in Bosnia, but also in Serbia. For example, IOM established or helped establish the Service for Foreigners Affairs in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is now the main institution or agency that governs entry, stay, and exit in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I think it transformed from the management of humanitarian response and resettlement into a governing of migration kind of facilitator and supporter of governments.
I see. And so now today, so you mentioned capacity building. You help with that. You mentioned your relations with the EU. So concretely, if it was very interesting that you mentioned, for instance, this Jewish association, it really makes it concrete for us. So today, concretely, is your work mostly about, for instance, those migrants in the Balkan route? And what is it you are doing concretely with them?
Okay, so here I think in 2025, looking back and taking stock of what we do, our portfolio is very much, let's say, covering IBM or Immigration and Border Management. So capacitating the border police and migration authorities into governing their borders.
Okay.
Which is, we work with Frontex, we work with different organizations that kind of provide trainings, capacity, but also, purchase of equipment that are required under certain standards. We work on the IBM strategy, which is the Integrated Border Management Strategy, which provides for all sorts of, policy and legal frameworks, adaptation and alignment. We are in terms of counter trafficking and counter smuggling, we do not necessarily work on direct assistance like we used to do in the past, in the 90s or maybe at the beginning of the crisis. We work with government authorities and government institutions in helping their own ability to respond more systematically and in line with their own legislation and international obligations, meaning that they need to have a system in place for identification of victims of trafficking. They need to have in place accommodation for victims of trafficking. They need to have in place a system that provides the ability for these people to receive legal stay and regularize their status. They have to be able to enter a system or a process of integration or return. So these are all very clear obligations that stem from the legal framework, which is mainly coming from the law on foreigners, law on asylum, and law on border control. So
Do you help with returns?
we do help with returns. We have, of course, traditionally, worked on assisted voluntary return, which is also another of our programs, which has been very, I would say, known internationally. So we have started working on AVRR in 2016 after we realized that many of the people that were moving through the region became stranded and wished to also be returned to their countries of origin when that was possible. And we have returned with the authorities more than 3,000 people since then,
Since which date?
since 2017.
Okay.
To
I mean,
more than
compared to
40,
the magnitude of the flow, it's not a
it's
lot, but
minimal. It's
minimal.
absolutely minimal. What we are working now with EU member states and also Frontex is to establish a return mechanism that is effective and that includes, readmission cooperation with countries of origin, non-voluntary and voluntary returns as well. You see that the countries in the Western Balkans have very few readmission agreements, have very few active arrangements with countries of origin on identification of nationalities and identities. They have a very hard time in establishing the nationality of a person because there is no direct channel of communication with the countries of origin. So a lot of the people that come here and are registered and even taken biometric data, we still believe that their nationality is a declared one. So there hasn't been confirmed. So we say, okay, 70% are Afghanis, but they say they're Afghanis. They may be something else, we don't know. I mean, the authorities don't know because the ability for them to exchange information, they're not in Eurodac, so they cannot access that kind of information from other places, for example, Greece, that these people may have transited from, or Bulgaria. So they have to re-establish their identity and nationality. And the cooperation that they have with countries of origin is minimal. So our work now is to really establish this kind of cooperation.
We also had an interview with now IOM representative in Greece, and he was more focused on returns. Am I correct in understanding that because here IOM operates outside of the EU, you have a larger portfolio of tasks perhaps than IOM in Greece,
I would
including,
say so. Yeah.
yeah, so
I
you
would say.
cooperate, for instance, with Frontex, where they are not
Mhm.
active,
Yeah.
but precisely to transfer some of their expertise also in the region.
Yeah.
And likewise, you cooperate with other EU agencies in order to connect with local governments and inform them and help them with their international obligations.
Absolutely. I think
Mhm.
the work of IOM in a non-EU setting is different than in
It's
EU
different, yeah.
setting.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think the Greek office is mainly funded by the Greek government funding that comes in through DG Home or other regional instruments from the EU. And
Hmm.
so the government of Greece has asked IOM to step in certain areas and work with them on certain, responses.
Hmm.
Uh, Here,
Yes, yeah.
I think the agenda is a bit different. We work in partnership with the government, but not funded by the government. Here we are funded by the EU, largely. I think 70% of our funding comes from EU. And then there are some bilateral fundings, namely, the Danish has been very generous and interested in this region. Some Swedish money, the Italians have been interested, the UK to a certain extent. So there's more diversified funding than maybe in EU member states, where the funding comes mainly from the EU.
Mhm. So yeah, you are funded both by the EU and the individual states as well, often
Correct.
EU member states.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean it's interesting to see how well IOM has adapted over the decades, because this organization has managed to it's almost like a private firm that is able to redefine its role as the contexts are changing.
Yeah,
Uh,
listen, it's been, maybe the fact that we have been traditionally projectized compared to maybe other organizations has helped
yes.
us become or stay more agile and also be more resilient to shocks, especially now with the US pulling out of, multilateralism.
Mhm.
So I think that has really helped IOM to be more resilient in certain areas. Of course, the shock has been great to IOM as well globally, but in those area of work where the US funding was not necessarily critical, it has managed to remain very agile.
Yeah, I remember at the beginning of its history, IOM was very dependent on US
Yeah,
funding. But my understanding is that even before
yeah.
Trump presidency, it was less dependent now on US funding.
I think the dependency has been really always quite high. I think
Ah,
it's
always, okay.
about 45
Ah, oui.
percent.
Okay,
So
okay.
it's huge,
Mm,
but
yeah.
it's because we traditionally been funding or running the US resettlement program, refugee resettlement program, which was a huge portion of
In
IOM's
Latin America, I suppose
globally.
mostly.
Yeah, in
Okay.
Asia and
Asia
Africa.
as well.
So yeah, a lot of the work, that has been done traditionally by IOM for 50 years has completely closed.
Hmm. Hmm. I see. Oh, oh yeah. Oh, okay. Interesting.
Mm.
So it's a huge shock. Was it under the first presidency, or is it more pronounced now?
Now, absolutely
It's
now.
now.
We
Okay.
received the
So
stop work from the Trump administration, I think, within weeks of taking office, which means that all of the US funded programs were stopped within a 24-hour notice.
yeah. So it was part of the package when they stopped US aid abroad.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So it has been a big shock for the organization. I
Yeah.
understand, but perhaps less in your region
Yeah,
than in us.
absolutely. We had not been affected almost at all by
Okay,
the
it's other
stop work.
other operations elsewhere in Asia
Correct.
or Latin America that are
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
interesting. All right. So let's move back now out of these institutional issues to the current challenges in the regions, in the Western Balkans mostly. So we have a flow of irregular migrants, mostly young men, traveling from North Africa, the Middle East, perhaps a bit South Asia as well, or Central Asia, and via Istanbul airport very often across the Western Balkan route. Beyond the fact that those people are irregular and the destination countries try to prevent that flows from taking place, is that flow also a problem for the region?
Okay, first of all, since 2023, at the end of the year, there has been a significant decrease in the flows. You need to know that almost 60% lower figures have been recorded in 2024 and 2025.
Why?
Well, there are a number of reasons. We have looked into that in detail, and we believe that there are a number of things that influence that decrease. One, the most prominent, is the police operation that took place in 2023 in north of Serbia, where the Serbian police has really forcibly dismantled a number of networks, smuggling networks of Afghani and Syrian nationals, which were running basically the movements through Serbia towards Hungary. So that has taken place, and since then, the movement or the organization of these clans have probably moved somewhere else, partially in Bosnia, but also maybe outside of the Balkans. This has influenced, the inability of the migrants to move through Serbia because let's say, the logistical support was not there anymore. And there was this movement of the Serbian police to really relocate people from the north to the south of the country, making it really difficult for them to reach the destinations towards the Hungarian and the Croatian border in the north. So we assume that the migrants as well as the smugglers decided to look at other options instead of going through Serbia. The second thing is, of course, the investment by the EU in border control and surveillance that came in, including in Frontex deployments on borders and joint patrols that were taking place. So there's a stronger presence of Frontex in the region, as well, the operationalization of the status agreements that took place over the years. And now Frontex will be able to be deployed also in non-EU borders. So we are looking at how will that affect the border with Bosnia, for example, and Serbia and North Macedonia, which is the next kind of movement to take place. The third thing is that Romania and Bulgaria entered Schengen. So we assume that now some of the route will change across Bulgaria, having only one border to be crossed, and maybe the movements will not go through the Balkans anymore, but they will change into intra-European Union movements via Bulgaria and Romania. We have no necessarily data to confirm that or to validate. It's an assumption so far, but we are monitoring how this is looking. And then the fourth thing, I think it's something that the Greek government, I think, brought a law that would allow more than 30,000 people to receive working permits in Greece, irregulars, to kind of regularize and be able to work regularly in Greece. I think that has also influenced a little bit the onward movements from people residing in Greece for a long time without solutions. And then, Turkey has returned 180,000 people from Turkey to countries of origin in 2024. This is a huge number, potentially, a number of people that could have moved forward into the Western Balkan route. So looking at all of these elements combined, it may have influenced definitely the decline of the route. Of the people on the route.
Yeah, I see. I have the feeling listening to you, the last factor is the most important. It's as if Turkey
Yeah.
now was also helping European countries rather than being a more or less passive recipient of or host country for smuggling networks. Now Turkey seems to be much more proactive in the same fight as EU countries.
They are very, Turkey is, everything in Turkey has a scale of its own. The numbers are just incomparable to any, I would say, EU country or even Western Balkans specifically. I mean, the number of people that they have there, the number of people that there are in asylum procedure, the number of irregulars, the number of returnees, everything is really huge compared to what's happening here. So I think whatever Turkey does in a systematic manner has an incredible impact, on the route.
And okay. And regarding my initial question about the impact of this flow, okay, the flow has declined, but nevertheless,
Yes.
the impact of the flow on the region, was the region exclusively a transit region for this flow, and what was the impact?
Yeah.
Were there,
Okay,
were there,
I'll try to be, I'll try
yes,
to be concise on this.
yes, yes.
It's really evolved since, your question is really pertinent, and I will reply to it. And then I will give you also an observation that is also developed recently, which influences the picture, let's say, of the response and of the impact on the region. So this region has been traditionally a region of emigration. So a lot of people have traditionally emigrated to the EU and other places over the years. And an incredible amount of people live abroad. So, still today. And there is an incredible also pace of emigration that continues as we speak, which leaves the labor market and the need for labor kind of really an acute problem here in the Western Balkans. And I will come back to that. But you have over the years this incredible flow of people that move through the countries, and the countries have tried under the EU influence to establish a governance structure or system or a response for this movement. They have not been necessarily very successful in changing the narrative of the countries here about seeing the movements as only transit. So all of these people that move through, for example, the 120,000 in 2023 and 100,000 in 2024, only 3% of these people have actually entered the asylum procedure. A very few people seek international protection on the route. Why is that? One would think this would be the logical thing to do. First of all, there is this narrative or general understanding that these people are in transit, so the authorities don't necessarily approach their processing from this point of view that they should be, provided with a sustainable solution once in country. They also have a very transit kind of understanding of their role. The asylum process has been really, despite the fact that it has improved over the years, it's still not necessarily adequate as a response to the needs of migrants and refugees moving through the Western Balkan route. Last year, I think in Serbia, there was one asylum case that was given. One. How is that even possible? And then also they tend to provide subsidiary protection rather than full asylum protection. Very often in Bosnia and Herzegovina specifically, that is the case. Maybe the only country that has done a bit more progress on this is Montenegro, also given its size and population and generally the migrant population there. They have kind of excelled in their ability to process asylum cases and asylum requests better than maybe their peers in other countries in the Western Balkans. So the asylum process is still, I would say, under underutilized and does not necessarily provide the necessary safeguards to make sure that there is a good asylum system in place. The second thing is that the reception facility that they have put in place in the Balkans, mainly in Serbia and in Bosnia, are largely funded by the EU. So they have been established, paid, and now they are run by money from the EU, which is, not a sustainable way of governing this kind of response. But I think this is part of the political agreement that the EU made with Serbia early on and with Bosnia later on in terms of the number of people that they should be able to host in their countries during this migration situation that they are facing. These numbers are not significant, honestly. It's not something that the countries should be crippled by. We're talking about a few thousands of people, It's really not a significant impact on anything, not either on their educational system or their, health system, nor on any kind of social systems. I mean, these figures are not figures that would be earth-shaking, for an administration of a middle-sized economy in a countries like the Western Balkans. But, they managed to provide this kind of narrative to the EU, and the EU is willing to pay in order to make sure that these people are catered for, on the gates towards Europe. How will the pact impact this? It's really to be seen. There's a lot of changes that the pacts will bring on processing, on returns, on screening, and this area is on the gateway of Europe. And how will that affect their ability to deal with that? And will they be affected by the returns, by the screening processes that will be outsourced or externalized? We have to monitor this, and they are very wary of that, I have to say. They're very worried about what will the EU ask of them. So you heard these discussions about the return hubs being placed in different countries around the world. Will that be the Western Balkans, like the Italians, in Albania? So these are all issues that may affect their ability to manage their migration situation, and also the political narratives and dynamics that will be created between the Western Balkan countries and the EU. So I think there's a lot of things to still be monitored and to still be followed very carefully and very closely in terms of how the EU will move towards the Western Balkans on ensuring that this externalization does not cripple the efforts of the Balkan states have made so far in managing this migration flow. This would be one thing, but there's another thing, and then maybe you can ask. There's another thing which we have seen, which lies into the intro that I gave you. There have been a lot of changes in the way labor migrants have come into this region. So over the first few years, we have seen an increase in labor migrants being present in the Western Balkans. So last year, only 100,000 work permits have been issued in the Western Balkans. In Serbia alone, 52, with an increasing trend. So we are talking about now figures of foreigners coming in regularly, working regularly, living in the Western Balkans that is far higher than the irregular migrants that cross through the countries. So, and the nationalities are very similar. There's the Bangladeshis, the Nepalese, the Indians. There's a lot of Turkish nationals, but they come in through companies, so it's a different kind of migration. But we are looking at now at the regular flow to labor work that to labor migrants that need to come, and they are, you know, there are associated risks with this new trend. There are issues related to exploitation practices, of ethical recruitment practices, of onward movements towards the EU, you know, because a lot of these arrangements are not government-to-government arrangements. These are private sector arrangements through recruitment agencies that have not necessarily been regularized properly. They're not monitored properly. They're not sanctioned properly. So I think there's another layer of migration kind of dynamic that now kind of dominates the discourse, at least that of numbers, that has not yet captured the full attention of the authorities nor the EU.
Very, very interesting, yes. And last question on my side is, what are the prospects for EU accession in the region? How will it transform current practices and your role?
Yeah, listen, it's we have worked very hard on ensuring that the process of alignment with Chapter 23 and 24 happens. We have tried in our programmatic and strategic way to make sure that all the objectives of the programs are aligned with the objectives of the action plans for, you know, Chapter 24, for example, the Schengen Action Plan, the IBM Action Plan. So we have systematically followed the EU accession agenda and provided thematic and very targeted support to ensure this accession is accompanied through our programming and through our technical support. Especially, I would say, in Montenegro, we now are, you know, applying or are operationalizing the master plan, which was done by Frontex, which looks at the Eurodac operationalization and the setup of a national coordination center, which is a requirement under Chapter 24 for EU accession, and will enable probably the Montenegrins to close Chapter 24 if this is conducted successfully by the end of 2026. So we are super engaged and very much invested in this very complex processes and very demanding, because, you know, they're process-based. They are structurally, the structural changes need to happen and take place. So I think it's really, for us, it's also part of our modus operandi, but our mandate in a way to establish this kind of progresses. So in terms of prospects, you know, there are two front runners in this game. It seems that Albania and Montenegro are very close to this benchmarking exercise being completed. We see the changes that have taken place in the way the administrations have engaged in this. We see the motivation, the fervor, the openness, the systematic work on these topics. There has been an institutional change, I would say, that is observable now. Not so much for the other countries, I would say. No, not at all.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Mrs. Bradic, for sharing these various insights on the region. Yes, we learned a lot about the management of migration flows in that particular region, the transitions that are going on, the dynamics, the various actors. So thank you very much for contributing to this interview.
You're welcome, Emmanuel and Lisa. I hope I answered your questions and your expectations, and you got what you expected. And I'm happy to, you know, provide you some more information or, you know, links or access to some documents that you might be interested. Please let me know. I'll be happy to engage.
Perfect. Thank you.
Welcome.